Hello, I'm Shereen Lovegrove, and I'm the author of The Aha Moment and the creator of the I CAN model. If you have a history of wanting to change a behavior or having changed but relapsed time and time again, well, then this is the place for you to be. Because today we're going to talk about how you can make a big change and to make that change stick. In this session, we're going to talk about the 3 natural barriers to change and how we can overcome them. The 3 natural barriers are this. A lack of coherence between our thinking system and our feeling system. Our brain is programmed for change, but it prefers to stay the same. And our brains confuse perception with truth. I'm also going to tell you about a very special brain mechanism called the Error Detector, which when activated will help you overcome these barriers. And I'm also going to go through the I CAN model and some of the boot camps which you can purchase on the Transformation TV so that you can maximize the effects of the I CAN method. Most importantly, I'm going to go through some real-time exercises. And if you want to work on a problem, you can do this now in the session and treat it as a mini session. Therefore, to ensure that you have enough time to do the exercise, I will actually slow the pace down so that you can process information. However, what might be helpful is for you to actually notice where the recording of this particular exercise is so that you can come back and repeat that exercise. This will help you strengthen those neural connections that are associated with that learning in your brain. I'm not going to go into much detail about this, but just to say, when you repeatedly do exercises, you are effectively hardwiring those neural pathways in your brain. There is a slogan in neuroscience that describes something called Hebbian associative learning, which was first proposed by Donald Hebb, a Canadian neuropsychologist, which states that neurons that fire together wire together. So neurons that persistently fire together, persistently and repeatedly will wire together. Now, there is a lot of content here. This is a huge topic to talk about. So in order not to overwhelm you, I've spaced the material out over 3 lectures. There is one, the serious science, which is all about the neuroscience of the brain and how the brain changes. There's the I CAN model, which talks more specifically about I CAN and the idea of addictive behaviors. So first, perhaps it may be useful for me to tell you a little about myself. My background is that I have run a successful practice as a UKCP registered neuropsychotherapist for the past 20 years, typically having about 15 to 20 clients a week. And my main clients have really been about giving up smoking or drinking or overeating, alternatively also dealing with a lot of stress and anxiety, and especially things like PTSD as well. And what I have truly found out of all of them is those clients that have been extremely successful on their journey are those clients that have been able to take control of their mental state. So take control of the way they think, the way they feel, and then ultimately the way that they act in a permanent way. For others, it's been a little more laborious because their process has often been quite disheartening because they've relapsed quite a lot. And yeah, if you continuously try to do something, it can be very difficult when you relapse time and time again. So the fact that they were relapsing, despite the fact that they were so interested and wanting to change, was of great interest to me. Luckily, I found the answer while I was studying for my master's in cognitive neuropsychology. I had a breakthrough where for the first time, I was able to see how I could apply neuroscientific approaches to my therapeutic practice. As I said, there's a key phenomenon which is all about relapsing. And although this hadn't really been truly understood on a neurological level until we got neuroimaging, especially functional MRIs, where we could show definitively that the brain changes because of what we persistently do. And the word persistent is really important. However, from a clinical experience, when people relapsed, they seemed to follow a kind of pattern that used to start, say, for example, like they wanted to start a diet. They would be excited about going on a diet and they would stop the bad foods for a few days. But because that was a habit that they were doing all the time, they kind of started to feel a little bit bad because they weren't getting their normal hit. And the problem is, once they got to that level, they relapsed, they had something, and that wouldn't have been a problem if they had just swung straight back out. No siree. What happens is they start to beat themselves with an internal dialogue, and that just takes their mood down even further, and it becomes harder to come back up. But after they've been down at the bottom for a little while, resilience does build because our bodies do like to start doing things. They try to get better, and so we come back up and we gain a little bit of hope and a little bit of help. However, some people typically make a lot of attempts, and some continue to make a series of attempts and never actually manage to sustain their desired change. So here's an example of a slide that I have showing just this process. So let me share the screen. I have labeled this diagram with emotional states people go through and some examples of the internal dialogue that are typical for each stage of this relapse cycle. And I'll talk about these emotional states later on in the lecture. So here we are. I feel fat, right? And I'm feeling a little sad. Then I decide I'm going to give up cake, and I'm quite happy about that. But as I said, we aren't getting our fix, so we miss cake and start feeling scared. Then we eat cake. And then all of a sudden we beat ourselves up because now we're mad and scared at ourselves. And we start saying things like, I let myself down. Everybody thinks I'm a joke. I'm useless. I'm going to die fat. I'm such a bad example for my kids. And you wallow there for a little while, but slowly the energy starts to come and you start to feel a little more hopeful, and you kind of feel a mixed feeling of sad, glad. And then you start to think, I can do this, and you start to lift your mood a little bit. And then, yay, you've given up cake again and you feel great. And of course, this is over time, yeah? But what neuroscience tells us that human beings that have sustained change when their brains have achieved aha moments. These are very specific moments that are highly charged, mentally active states. And once I read and I understood what that was about, I could see and help my clients achieve sustained change and achieve it fast. I haven't been the only one to think of this. Actually, there have been some really controversial evidence going on in the big universities, such as King's College, Bristol, and we have here Imperial College, and Johns Hopkins in New York, and UCLA. So what they've done is they've used mind-altering drugs such as LSD, piperacillin, ayahuasca to help addicts spontaneously transform their behaviors by using drug-induced aha moments to transform their addictive behaviors. They haven't managed to totally take away the desire and the addiction, but what they have managed to do is make sure that the relapses are longer, and they've also made relapse times between times are much longer, and the times between going into the new stage of transformation where they immediately go into the behavior is much, 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 much shorter. So I was aware of this research, and once I had studied the science for myself, I realized that I could achieve the same ahas for my clients without drugs by using the natural brain mechanism. So before I start talking about the 3 brain mechanisms and the error detector, I want you to tell you a little bit about my journey. As I said, I was a therapist for over 20 years, working with clients. And it was up to 3 years ago where I was someone that had tried and relapsed many times in my own desire to control my eating so that I could manage my weight. So here's my story. So over a number of years, I had become a master at losing weight. In fact, I had been developing these weight loss mastery skills since the age of 14 when I was at boarding school. And I put on 44 pounds in weight in my first term. I immediately was so embarrassed, I did a knee-jerk reaction and I started my first diet, which was the apple diet. A bit extreme, but I don't do things by halves. 3 apples a day for 3 days meant that I lost weight, probably water, very quickly, and it was unsustainable. And I was also very hungry. Needless to say, I put the weight back on, and from then on I yo-yoed. But I got so good at losing weight like a top professional, which I was rather proud of. But I never learned to keep the weight off permanently. Sadly, all good things come to an end, which is awful, in my second last year of university, where I was doing my undergraduate degree, and I packed on a cool 52 pounds, which put me into the clinically obese era. The problem was this time, the very thing that I was so good at was now failing me, and I was unable to lose weight. Now, there was a whole lot of things that probably contributed to this situation, which you might find up and look up in great detail in my book, The Aha Moment. But the crux of it was that despite my being overweight and having health issues, I just didn't lose any weight. I couldn't lose weight. But to make things worse, I put myself in a bind. I worked as a therapist where I specialized in helping people lose weight. And guess what? I couldn't even lose weight, so how could I do that? So I lost a lot of revenue. And every time I thought about losing weight, I was so overwhelmed and paralyzed. So I truly do understand what it feels like to be stuck in this way. But thankfully, everything fell into place when I had my aha moment. And not only did I find a way to lose my weight, but I was also able to keep the weight off effortlessly and easily. So from personal experience, I then developed my ICANN model, which is a simple model that can harness the way that the brain likes to work so that change can be relatively effortless and easy. This also meant that I was able to help my clients not only accelerate their ability to change their behaviors, but also to reinforce those changes so that they stick. So I learned to reshape my brain and take control of my mental state. And when a friend asked me how I managed to do this, I began to realize what I had done. And my understanding of neuroscience behind this and the change, I was able to create my ICANN model, which is the program designed to help you deal with behaviors such as drinking, smoking, weight loss, weight issues, any other kind of addictive type of behavior. Now, you might wonder why I'm categorizing addictive behaviors here. Well, I'd like you to consider that all behaviors that attracts you to do something in a repeated way are addictive behaviors, even the good ones. We repeat them because they give us some sort of reward. The question is the reward good for you or not? Does the reward help you grow, develop, expand, and become a better human being? If it doesn't, it isn't good for you. And it has to change. So going back a little, you may or may not be aware of this, but when we want to change a behavior, we usually go through a series of steps. But as you might know from personal experience, or certainly from me, it was about 2 steps forward, 1 step back sometimes. And this continues to happen until our neural pathways, yes, are hardwired. Here's an example of how a person might go through these steps. And I'm going to use the example in my book of Sally, which will be helpful when you read the book. In January, Sally has been smoking 15 to 20 cigarettes a day for roughly about 20 years. And it depends. I mean, sometimes socially she may have a little bit more. On the whole, she's been amazingly fit. She does exercise. But over the last 4 years, she's noticed a subtle change in her health. She's started to realize that actually she's finding it a little more difficult to walk up hills and also an exercise. She also is having difficulty getting rid of the colds, that she's been getting a few more persistent ones. She doesn't really think that this is anything to do with her smoking. Oh no, this is just about her getting old, all right? Smoking helps her. You know, when she's anxious at work or she doesn't want to get in a fight, she disappears and goes and has a cigarette. Or at the end of a meal, her meal, she has a cigarette so she doesn't have a dessert, and it controls her weight. But in July, she gets particularly hit hard by a cold. And she starts to think about it and starts to come, it's like bubbling in the back of her head. It's been worrying her that her health isn't getting better. And so she realizes she's probably going to have to stop smoking. But the thought of smoking is now looming. And because it's looming, it's making her feel a little anxious. So she's smoking a little bit more. But by Christmas time, she's still smoking, but she's still thinking about it. She's still trying to put a few strategies in place. She's read up a little bit more about smoking, and she's convincing herself a little bit more. She has made attempts to cut down, but she hasn't been completely successful yet. And she does try the trick of the New Year's resolution, but she fails. Finally, around Easter, she reaches a point where there's a strong, strong feeling that she must do it, and she does. She decides to stop for good. Now, even though she stopped for good, doesn't mean she's actually stopped there and then. She's made the decision to stop. 6 months later, having consciously worked hard at actually continuously stopping, she's still working and she's still struggling a little bit, occasionally relapsing, because it hasn't become her state of being yet. These are not automatic behaviors for her yet. They're not in her unconscious mind. You know, you and I, we can talk, we can think, we can read. These are all automatic. We don't have to think about them anymore. So therefore, she's requiring effort in order to change. And this means she's always potentially at risk, which she typically does every now and then when she goes to a party or to the pub. Although she does get back much, much quicker after the slump. So we can see that changing a behavior like this can be fraught with potential relapses until those brain changes happen and are hardwired. Although it must be said that people never really relapse back to ground zero. There's always learning involved. So if they don't carry on, it's because they're choosing not to listen, yeah? But in general, those old ways are more prone to relapses. And we'll talk about that in another session, but also there is some information in my book. However, in my situation, I changed almost immediately. I went straight on track, and that was it. So the ICANN model still follows those natural sequence of events, but what it does do is it tries to specifically create peak experiences or highly charged experiences at particular transformation states. So we'll call them transition states. And we'll talk more about ICANN, of course, in the third lecture. But think of transition like this. If you think of water, water has 3 states. It's a solid, a liquid, and a gas. And at 0 degrees, water is ice and water. And at 100 degrees Celsius, water is liquid and vapor. If you put a massive amount of energy to melt the ice, it's very quickly going to boil. Yeah. If you only put a little bit of heat, it's going to just start to simmer and trickle, and it's going to take forever. All right. So the upshot of this is if we experience a highly charged movement repeatedly, we create a permanent memory. And if we do this, and when we do this, we create an effect in the brain that triggers our goal activation center. And goals are all about going forward and achieving something. But the goal activation center brings the memory back into the forefront of our mind so that we remember, so we don't forget, and it's hard to ignore. So let's go through the key ICANN transition states. Okay, ICANN stands for insight, commitment, aha, and new person. So the insight is where Sally finally realizes that smoking is causing her problem and she has to do something about it. Her commitment is when she decides to stop for good. The aha moment is when there is an experience of an all-encompassing embodied experience where everything changes. And the new behavior is where she begins to be self-sustaining. Good. So now you understand why the ICANN method works. And also understand why I ask you to keep repeating the exercise, just deepening, because every time you do that, you create the hardwiring, but more energy. You want to build up that energy to create an aha moment. On this next slide, I've just outlined the boot camps quickly for you so that you can be able to see what it is. So the first two boot camps are with insight, and here we're going to look at how you stop deceiving, deluding, and denying yourself. The third boot camp is the commitment boot camp, and that is we will look at how you accept what needs doing and how to commit to yourself. The next boot camp, Forum 5, is knowing the full embodied experience of an aha and everything that change stands for. And the 6th boot camp stands for the new behavior and how to sustain and change, stopping yourself from going off track and preventing yourself from relapsing. Okay. Now I've outlined for you how the ICANN method works. I want to go back to those 3 natural barriers you might remember me telling you about. But before we do that, you may also remember me telling you about that very special brain mechanism, our error detector. Well, very few people really understand about the error detector. We have the error detector, we know the error detector, but we really often don't pay attention to it, and we don't know truly what it is. Our error detector is that cognitive jolt that we experience when something we've anticipated unexpectedly doesn't happen. Its purpose is to reorientate you so that you can reassess, reevaluate, and change. Isn't that great? The error detector is otherwise known as the N200 or the N2 and is a specific brain wave that we see on neuroimaging technology such as the EEG. And it shows up as a negative deflection at the 200 millisecond mark after a stimulus has happened. This is just at the edge of our conscious awareness. So the purpose of the error detector is to monitor for mismatches between what is currently running, coming into us, and what we are doing. Here's a couple examples of how the error detector commonly shows up. Well, one is finishing people's sentences. We're only able to finish people's sentences because we are anticipating what they're going to say. It's all very good while we're anticipating, but the moment there's a mismatch, we go, oh, what's going on? So the jolt that we experience is the mismatch between what we are expecting them to say and what they are actually saying. An example could be like you think of just going in this way. So, boy, girl, man, wife, cat, dog, nurse, doctor, cow, fairy, lion, tiger. You might find that something went a little bit wrong there, and you may have noticed the fairy was a little bit out of kilter there. And that is what the error detector does. It immediately helps us to correct, reevaluate our thoughts, and to change, which makes it an invaluable learning process. So just to show you how the error detector helps us in the ICANN process. So here we are. Here's ICANN. And the error detector here helps us to notice and come to the realization that what we think to be true is not true anymore. That's the insight. We recognize and acknowledge we're out of the delusion. The error detector helps us to decide on the right fit, the goodness of fit with regards to the commitment. The error detector helps to move us into an aha moment when everything slots together. The error detector tells us, it gives us this massive experience. And the error detector allows us to know when we're going off track once we've set in the new behavior. Good. So our error detector allows us to consciously process information. So let's go back to those key concepts now, and we'll see how the error detector helps us through that. So the first key concept is a lack of coherence between our thinking system and our feeling system. So to understand this is we need to understand that there are two systems that are so different, but they run simultaneously within the body. They process information quite differently. There is our emotional system, which we mainly feel in our body, and there's our thinking system, which is in our head. Very much what we do very much in today's world. We think in our head and we don't think that this has anything to do with that. So our emotional stuff is very visceral, yeah? All right, so here's a nice little example of how our emotional system looks. So here you can see that our emotional system kind of explodes. You know, it's like a great big firework. It's a very fast, rapid signaling system which responds rapidly to sensory experience, particularly sensory experience that's perceived as threat. This system is fully developed when we're born, and it is highly invested in keeping us safe. And you will know this as the fight, flight, freeze mechanism. Our cognitive system over here, which you can see is a very logical sequence of steps, step by step, and it is a little bit slower, unlike our rapid signaling system. So when we're calm, there's lovely free flow between our head and our heart. But unfortunately, when we're stressed, whether it is real stress or not, we go into the same evolutionary responses that we did when we were out on the plains. Okay, what happens is blood moves away from our thinking part of our brain, and it moves to the back of the brain and to the rest of the body. Because what it needs to do is to get our body activated to do something. If something's threatening, like someone's angry, we need to be aware of them so we are ready to fight. We look, we stay, we poise. When we're ready to run, we galvanize, we scarper. So we need blood, we need things in our muscles, blood, oxygen, sugar, to get us away. So all the organs that are involved with that, they get highly activated. But the organs that are not, don't. So things like our gut slow down, and basically our cognitive thinking slows down. In fact, we become locked in to one system, our emotional system, and we become locked out to our thinking system. So a nice way to think of it is, think about this as my prop. Think of this as your spinal cord, on which all the nerves come off to the body. Here is your emotional system. So this is the midbrain. Here is the amygdala. This is the happy trigger, the trigger. At the back of the brain is the cerebellum, which is involved with the muscles. Yeah, it does our proprioception. And take our fingers as our cognitive area. So normally what happens, the amygdala sits like that, and everything's like this. This is free flow. Okay, love. All right? But the moment stress happens, whoa, that's what happens. All right? And what is interesting is that there is an area that sits over the brain like this, and I'm going to pretend it's this bit here over my knuckles, under my knuckles, and that is the area of the anterior posterior cingulate. And this area actively blocks information going between these regions. So you can see that it can be immensely difficult to move from there to here. But we have to bring our cognitive mind on track. We have to bring the error detector there. So we need to notice this mismatch between this feeling very quickly and do something with it so that we can address it. And it can be quite challenging, but the best way to do it is to give ourselves good self-talk. What we effectively want to do is to bring our thoughts to our hearts. Right. And here's a lovely picture. What we want to do is we want to create a coherence between our heart and our mind. Because when we bring our head into our heart, we actually are listening to what our heart is trying to tell us. And, you know, if you ignore things, well, you know what? They get worse. So we want to bring it down into our heart so we can hear what the heart has to say. But when we do that, what happens is we form a beautiful kind of coherence. And that coherence creates a harmonic type of wave, both in our brain and our heart. And the Institute, you can find plenty of this up in the Institute of Heart Math. I do appreciate that it can be quite difficult, but you can do some things to instantly help yourself. One of the things to do is to decode judgment. You know, the moment we start to think, oh, it's bad that I've done that, what we hear is, I'm bad. We take it as an identity statement. So what we've got to do is actually change it, that it moves away from an identity statement into a thing that we can do something about, right? A thing that we can do. So we have to move away from good and bad feelings to more useful or not useful or helpful or unhelpful. All right? So you can say, having had that cigarette, was that bad for me? Or was that just not helpful for me? If you do it like that, what happens is when you say, well, that was not more helpful for me, you immediately go, yeah, well, that's true. Okay, I can do something about it. But when I'm bad, and it starts to make you anxious. So just by changing some words, learning to quickly change some words can be immensely helpful in just taking the judgment down. The second one is to quickly look at that this problem that I'm happening is a solution to a bigger problem. It's the lesser of the bigger sufferings. And that's really useful, because if you think about it, if you think where I talked about Sally, she was using her cigarette to help her keep weight off. Weight was really important for her. She was quite a fit lady. She didn't want to be fat. And so she knew that if she stopped smoking, fat was going to be a problem. Yeah? So it's really important that you look at the other suffering so that you can correct yourself and say, is that true? So it's really about accepting that and understanding that point of view. And the third one is to give your heart some time to speak. This helps give some resilience because it allows us to hold the feeling, all kinds of feelings together. But also what they've found is that research has shown that if you actually just name the feeling, you actually can bring the frontal cortex back online. So actually you bring the error detector back to give you the right kinds of information that you need. Also, that emotions, there's never just one emotion evolved. There are many emotions evolved, but they're mainly four, which are anger, which I'm going to say mad, sad, glad, and scared. All right, so I'm going to do an exercise now, so please just check on the timing, and remember that the more you practice it, the better you get at it. All right, I'm just going to go into the share right now so that you can follow. All right, here we are. So I want you to think about something that's not particularly stressful, please. Probably about a 4, maybe a 5 on the Richter scale out of 10. And then what I want you to do is to just think about that for a moment. And probably, I mean, I would say go for something like, say, you were just really upset that you shouted at somebody, or that you had that piece of cake, or that you let yourself down in some way. You didn't do a test, all right? Just allow yourself to be aware of that for a minute. And I want you to just start to frame the words in the way that I want you to do it. So I want you to just say, I'm going to use an example of shouting at somebody, my partner. And I'm going to go, you know, I am so mad that first of all, he didn't listen to me. And I'm so mad I got hooked back into answering him back. And it just escalated. And I'm really mad. I mean, really, did I really, really need to bite back? Was it really necessary? I'm so mad at myself. I could have stopped this process happening, and I wouldn't have been feeling so bad right now. Okay. So allow yourself to just go through the feelings of that, feeling really pissed off with yourself, basically. And just let those thoughts come in for a moment. And then you can either do sad or scared here. It doesn't matter, but it's probably useful to go, I'm really sad that this happened again. I'm so sad because I know that it hurts me, and I know that it upsets him, and I love him, and I don't want to upset him. I don't want to upset me. And I know that, this is just the result of me having had a bad night's sleep, and I'm stressed. And I know that he's had to take the brunt. And I feel ashamed of myself. And then I'm scared. I'm scared what it's going to be like when he comes home. Because I didn't say sorry, and I haven't said sorry. And it seems to be so long now between now and then. Oh God, I just don't know how I'm going to deal with this. I'm really scared. Now, during the course of each of these stages, you can actually stop the recording and just vent. Just get it out as much as you can. Because what I want you to do is get the feeling out so there's nothing there left. And when that's done, I want you to move to the gladness. And I want you to be aware of that gladness. And I want you to just think about, what are you truly glad about now, having known this? This is the time for learning. This is a time, you were given this because this has been given to you so that you can become better. This can be given to you so that you can know for next time what to do. So be glad. So it could be that I'm really glad that I have this information. I'm really glad, even though I'm sad, I am glad that I'm now starting to think how I can change this. I'm glad that I know that this is not really about him, but this is about that time when I've grown up and I've been triggered so often. And I'm glad because I can now tell him that was the trigger. And I'm glad now because I have a language that I can use to tell people or tell him how I feel. And I can now say, I'm sorry, because I understand. The interesting thing is that when we're glad, everything changes. It opens our heart to hope. And it makes our heart more coherent. And we can then get what we want. And that is a really powerful place to be. Okay, so our next natural barrier is our brain is programmed for change, but it prefers to stay the same. Now, isn't that bizarre? I find that pretty bizarre, but there is method in the madness. Our brain is designed to change so that we can survive. So that we can survive and then thrive. And we need to change because we need to be able to evolve. We need to be able to adapt to circumstances. And so therefore, it is really important. So our brain likes to change. But also it helps us because when we do something that's out of the ordinary, a little novel, we get a little hit of a reward. And that reward makes us feel good. And that makes us want to do more. So that's the lovely part, because that's how learning is. Learning is the hit that makes us want to do more. So we keep on doing it. We know as adults, we've learned to text, we've learned to do all sorts of things. Well, certainly in my time, when I first came to England, there were no mobiles, tell me what. Now all of a sudden we can watch videos on mobiles. We can do all sorts of things. We're learning all the time. Technology is changing all the time. And so therefore we have to learn. We have to program ourselves. So learning is really important. So the error detector is the one that tells us we're moving out of our mismatch. And guess what? It gives us the hit. All right. Makes you excited. But I also mentioned that the brain likes to stay the same. Interesting, but we've already talked about why. Every mechanism in our body has a purpose, and our brain uses a huge amount of energy in order to change. So anybody that remembers learning to drive a car or ride a bicycle or learn any new skill that's going to require them to think hard and then also do other things together, it is exhausting. And only when we start to get used to doing them, that we go through various stages of competency, that we start to hardwire those neural networks so that now, I mean, I can ride on a motorway. I don't even, well, I do look at the mirror, but you get a sense of being able to drive safely without having to really pay super duper attention. Because we can do multiple things because a part of us is now hardwired to do that. I'm going to talk more about that in this serious science lecture. So we know our brain likes to change, and it also likes to stay the same. So let me give you a tangible example of how the error detector works. So what I'd like you to do is to just for a minute, just interlock your fingers. I do this a couple of times, 3 or 4 times. And as you do that, you may begin to notice that your fingers go the same way every time. Now what I want you to do is, if your thumb, whichever thumb is on the top, I want you to put it underneath the thumb when you go the next time. So interlock slightly differently. So the thumb that was on the bottom is now on the top. All right. Now, you might find that this does feel a weeny bit strange. But as you override it, you'll find that it calms down. So by practicing doing a new change, it can be strange for a little while, but after a while, it calms down. So your neurons unlock and then relock in another pattern. So how do we apply this with the error detector? So remember, the purpose of the error detector is to get you to stop, reassess, reevaluate, and act. So when you experience a sensation, a gut feeling, a mismatch, you attend to it, because that is just your error detector saying, hello, pay attention. The most important thing is not to ignore the error detector. So when you notice, say, you've poured yourself a drink or you've lit your cigarette, you don't go, oh, well, I've done that, I may as well have that. No, that's not what you do. If you carry on drinking, you're feeding the addictive behavior. Yeah? So you're hardwiring that some more. So what you need to do is make a friend of your error detector, because it's there for you to change. If you always do what you've always done, you're always going to get what you've always got. Is that what you want? I call it karma. I call it karma. So why not pay attention to the error detector? It's designed to help you. And so by paying attention to the error detector, we put consciousness in it. When we stop and we notice the pattern and we change. So punctuating accentuates the error detector and makes it stronger, so it can help you that little bit more. And we'll talk more about it in the boot camp. So before we go a little further, let's have a look at what we've covered so far. We've talked about people go through a series of process steps when they're changing a behavior, and they're very susceptible to relapse because neurons are not hardwired yet. We've discussed how the ICANN model helps novel situations and how to accelerate the time between the steps of relapsing and processes of change in order to prevent prelapses. We also talked about the 2 types of systems, our feeling system and our thinking system, that run simultaneously but work very differently to one another, and the lack of coherence between these 2 that forces our cognitive brain to go offline, and our error detector as well. And what we have just covered is the paradoxical effect of nerves that want to fire together and wire together, but also nerves that want to change. Yeah? So the third natural barrier now, and the final one, is this. Our brains confuse perception with truth. So this is quite important in the sense that everything we experience is just a construct of massive and neural firings that are like little hubs, little satellites that are just connected by energy. And in actual fact, if you think about the brain as being the hardware, our computer, and our mind being the process of that. So the brain is running a whole lot of programs that have been put in, but the mind is the result of it. So we might want to consider that our mind can fool us. So perhaps just have a quick look here at this Octavio de Campo picture, where you can see two older people. But if you look a little closer, you actually see that there are three younger people there. And, well, you can actually see that here is a girl, and here's a man, and here's somebody listening in, I guess. But, so you start off, you look at this from a default position. You see it globally, but when you home in, you start to see the mismatch. So our brain can fool us very, very easily because of the fact that we start off with a default setting. We look at the world through a filter. That's our default setting. And so therefore, we can often misconstrue information. But I've also said that we can fool our minds. So here's an example. What I'd like you to do is make a circle with your hand that you don't write with, so your non-dominant hand. And with your writing hand or your stronger hand, I want you to just gently open it. So I don't want you to do that, all right? I want you to actually just open it. Then what I want you to do is imagine that that's a ring of steel. So by imagining that's a ring of steel, see it as a ring of steel, and as it's a ring of steel, I want you to try and open it. Try and open it. Well, I'm pretty good at this. And what you'll find is as you try and open it, it just doesn't want to open. So it's really interesting because we can give our brain a direction. We can tell it something, and guess what? It does what we tell it. So we know our brain can trick us. We also know that we can trick our brain. So how do we use this to advantage? Knowing that actually everything is just the summation of lots and lots of programs that are running at any given moment. So perhaps you might want to consider this idea that thoughts are just things and feelings are just cognitive labels that we've allocated to a group of sensations. And however we've labeled them, so they've now become very real things. So consider the possibility that if your thoughts are just things, then is it possible that the only thing that separates you between your goal and your thoughts is your thoughts? If this is the case, what would it be like if that thought wasn't there? So you might want to practice this exercise, and we're going to go through it. So when your thoughts are getting in the way, you might ask yourself a couple of questions. Is what I'm thinking true? Is it really true? And what would it be like if it wasn't true? So perhaps let's think about somebody who thinks that they can't go to the pub and have a good time because they've given up smoking. or drinking. It really doesn't matter, but it's a useful thing. I'm going to go with drinking, perhaps. Let's work on that one. So because a lot of people, when they stop drinking, they avoid areas. So let's just kind of go with this one. So is it true that I would not enjoy myself if I go to the pub and I don't drink? Is it really, really true that my friends will force me to have that drink? They won't understand. Is it really, really true that I have such unkind friends that they would do everything to sabotage me? So they'd make me drink. They'd make me feel uncomfortable. Is it really true that I wouldn't enjoy myself without a drink? That I couldn't have a good time? And what would it be like if it weren't true? Allow yourself to just keep recycling. It's really important, because when we get stuck, when we are scared to do things, we kind of forget to ask this kind of question. And we are so busy living in the past that we project our past to our future. We've already predicted our future, which hasn't even happened yet. But we're coming with a construct of our past. Remember, the filter from the past now. So we need to push the past in the past so you can live your future. But the wonderful thing happens when you ask these questions, because by asking the question, the brain says, great, you've asked me. Now I can go and do some work. It's like a happy jappy. It's like a puppy. It wants to do work. And what happens is you bring on that error detector, and it goes on big time, online big time. And it starts to look for all the confirmatory evidence that is contrary to the belief that you're saying. So you'll come up with things like, are my friends so mean that they would do that? Oh, of course not. Yeah? So it brings up truths that allow you to see the mismatch so that you can let go and you can move forward. But also, the moment you do that, it opens a space for creativity to happen. And this is because your body no longer feels helpless and threatened, and so it relaxes. And this allows your brain to come back online, because it's invested in finding a solution to the problem. And so the error detector goes online massively to help you. So here is where we end today. So let's go back quickly over those key concepts which require the use of the error detector to change. Okay, we talked about the lack of coherence between our thinking system and our feeling system. And we talked about bringing the heart into coherence with the mind. We talked about the exercise of sad, mad, glad, scared. We talked about taking away judgment and the concept of the problem being the solution. That our brain is programmed for change, but it prefers to stay the same. And we talked about brain matter, or the neurons, as hardware and the mind as software. And we did the exercise of clasping the hand and saw how the error detector fired. But we also realized that we must pay attention to do something differently. And that our brains confuse perception with truth. And although it is a result of cognitive firing, of the hardware, when we did the ring experiment, we found out that the brain goes online and it does a global research to help us deal with situations. So we've come to the end of the talk now, and I've only just touched on some of the ICANN process. And as I've mentioned to you, I've made some videos and some material for you to purchase that will give you the tools right now to actively continue with your journey. There is something for everyone, whether you be a novice, whether you be somebody that's a professional coach or a therapist. So to hone your skills further on that, I've created workshops and webinars, and we'll be creating a Facebook that you might be interested in joining. You can contact me on my website, which is www.ican.co.uk. And I'm just going to leave the end page with my details there for you to look at. And I'll say goodbye and enjoy the rest of the TV summit.